Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Kedoshim, beginning in chapter 19 of the book of Leviticus. Our portion opens with the command, and Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel, and say to them, 'You shall be holy, for I, Hashem your God, am holy.'" This portion is so important, and its message is so crucial, that it was given over to the entire nation, men, women, and children, in assembly. Unlike some other instances in which the teaching of the mitzvot were given over to the people through the tribal heads, Moshe here gathered together the entire nation at once to teach them these commandments. And they're not addressed to an individual, but to the entire nation as a whole, as a community. They're meant to be kept together. Our opening verse instructs Israel to be holy as Hashem is holy. "You shall be holy, for I, Hashem your God, am holy." But what does that even mean? And what is it all about? How is it done? How can people be expected to be holy like God? What's the connection between the holiness required of Israel and the holiness of Hashem? So the adjective holiness is generally defined as dedicated or consecrated to God or a religious purpose, sacred. People tend to think of the concept of holiness as being quite a lofty level, worthy to strive towards, but unattainable to most. But Torah teaches that holiness is not a mystical concept, but something very tangible. In this regard, the Torah's definition of holy really conveys the idea of being set apart, of being separate. God is totally unique and incomparable to anything else in this world. And yet, even though God is separate from the world, he's not disconnected from it, but he's found within the world. So is it possible for people to be holy, but still to be part of this world? And it's intriguing that the verse emphasizes that this is one of the few portions of Torah which was given over to all of Israel at once, man, woman, and child, in assembly. A call to the entire nation with no exception. Speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel and tell them, "You shall be holy, for I, Hashem your God, am holy." This is the deepest idea in the world, so open up your heart. Torah is here declaring that this goal, to be holy, is required of each person, and therefore, if it's something that's required, that means that it is within reach for every individual to achieve. Since the portion begins with this call for holiness, it would follow that the key to understanding the practical definition of holiness must be outlined by what follows, that the holiness God requires of all of Israel is manifest in the following commandments. So an examination of our parsha should enlighten us as to the nature of holiness. Our portion of Kedoshim is full of commandments. It features 51 in all. Now, some of these commandments are of the type known as Ben Adam Lamakom. That means commandments that are a concern to God alone. These include prohibitions against idolatry and the forbidden mixtures, the commandment of Shabbat, reverence for the temple, and rules pertaining to the sacred offerings, agricultural laws that are applicable in the land of Israel, laws against following the idolatrous ways of the nations, such as Molten and sorcery and magical practices, and more. We also find here commandments of the category known as Ben Adam Lechavero, mitzvot that apply between man and his fellow, such as loving one's neighbor as oneself and reverence for parents, prohibitions against stealing and all forms of cheating, against making a false oath, against vengeance, against falsehood and talebearing, the commandment to rebuke one's fellow and to honor the aged, mitzvot concerned with social justice, such as the obligation to pay a worker on time and not to place any sort of stumbling block, never to take a bribe, loving the convert, the obligation to use honest weights and measures and engage in honest business practices and to help the other in a time of distress, and more. All told, our portion of Kedoshim showcases a wide variety of commandments, and the common thread that binds them all together is that they're all included in the framework of that very first verse, the call to be holy. The thing is, when it comes to one's private relationship with God and the fulfillment of those mitzvot that are ben adam lamakom, that are only of concern to the Creator, when it's a question of religiosity that's not based on interaction with others, so one could easily feign piety and convince oneself that he's truly serving God, even if it's all in his own head. Who's going to check? But the other type of mitzvot, the divine commandments of the category known as Ben Adam Lechavero, between man and his fellow man, Observing these properly is a lot harder, more difficult, a much greater challenge than keeping those commandments that are of concern only between man and God alone. It's easy to be pious when it's just me and God, and at the same time to be exploitive, God forbid, or manipulative, or just plain nasty to my fellow man. As the celebrated American cartoonist Charles M. Schulz's character Linus said in the classic comic strip Peanuts, "I love mankind. It's just people I can't stand." So open up your heart in the deepest way. Hashem loves people. So Torah measures what it means to be holy like Him by how we treat others. And honestly, how we treat others is what matters the most. We can act really pious and be very scrupulous when it comes to things that have nothing to do with social interaction. But the only true and accurate measure of a person is how he or she treats others. Among the mitzvot, which focuses on relationships and how the other should be treated, our parsha features the famous command, "And you shall love your fellow as yourself." The Talmud relates the story of a heathen who came before the great sage Hillel and said, "Convert me on the condition that you teach me the entire Torah while standing on one foot." Hillel stood on one foot and replied, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor." That's the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. Go and study it. And years later, the revered and truly holy teacher, Rabbi Akiva, famously said about this verse, this is a major principle of the Torah. In order to fulfill all these commandments of proper behavior between man and his fellow man, one is required to be very much involved with this world. These are mitzvot that they can't be accomplished through prayer or meditation. They can't be fulfilled by living separated from the world, by living an ascetic life. Yet they do require separation from the world in a certain sense, in the sense of not allowing oneself to be influenced by other people's evil ways, in the sense of not wanting to have anything to do with what most people define as proper behavior, in the sense that this world is overrun by corruption and selfishness and violence. That's what we have to be separate from, and yet remain very much in this world. And that indeed is a great challenge. But Torah's goal is not for people to remain aloof from society. The person whom Torah considers as living a holy lifestyle is not one who isolates in a tower so that he or she will not be bothered or tempted by the world. Neither does Torah define holiness as one who engages in bold acts of piety and self-denial. Holiness is not about extreme actions of piety which cause a person to separate from life, but the opposite. The more a person is involved with others and yet conducts himself justly, the holier the Torah would consider that person to be. The holy person is the one who is actively guided by Torah in everything, and thus is not afraid to be involved with every aspect of this very human life, to be a part of and to contribute to the betterment of human society right here in the very midst of this world. And this person operates out of a desire to reveal the godliness in every area of life. So, we've been talking about emulating God and striving to be holy like Him, and we're attempting to define what that holiness can mean in a practical sense. But just as it is easy to have misconceptions about what holiness means, well, how much more so when speaking about God, it's even easier to have misconceptions about God Himself. So notice something amazing. Just as soon as our portion opens, immediately following those most basic and most fundamental instructions of revering one's parents and observing the Shabbat, but prior to commencing the enumeration of all of the portion's many commandments, verse 4 tells us, "Do not turn to idols, and molten gods you shall not make for yourselves. I am Hashem your God." What is the significance of this warning, and why does it appear here? So open up your heart in the very deepest way. Just as true holiness needs to be measured by deed and integrity in relationships, because otherwise it could just be a figment of the imagination altogether, it can be totally in our heads, just like we can invent an idea of holiness which is nothing but a product of our own imagination, so too, we can invent God according to our own imagination. An all too human tendency is to try and lower God to our level, to a level of our convenience and comfort zone. In his commentary on this verse, the great Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch relates firstly to the beginning of the verse, "Do not turn to idols." He explains that the idolatrous perception of godliness lowers divinity to the level of an image created by humans, as was the case of the golden calf. Torah's truth demands the very opposite. Humans must elevate themselves and reach up towards God by shaping our entire human existence according to the will of God. Contrary to the idolatrous notion that intermediaries are needed between man and his God, Torah maintains that the relationship between God and man is direct. The most fundamental Torah truth is that man has free access to God directly without the necessity of any intermediary, and that the one and only condition for connecting with God is acting in obedience to him. In Rabbi Hirsch's words, do not entertain the vain thought that by making an image you'll have it in your power to decree about the deity that it shall come down to you, but rather it is incumbent upon you to elevate yourself to your God by shaping your entire human existence according to his will. He explains that the commandments demonstrate that man is capable of elevating himself to a covenantal relationship with God, and that when man, in his entire human existence, ascends to the proximity of God without any intermediaries, all of nature ascends with him. Rav Hirsch explains that according to the etymological analysis of the Hebrew, the word elilim, meaning idols, can best be understood as what he calls powers of denial, because the heathen conception honors their gods primarily because they fear them as hostile powers. Left to himself, he writes, man always feels limited and even at war with higher powers, powers whose tolerance must be forced or flattered or cajoled out of them, because otherwise they will deny man his wishes. This worldview is a product of the heathen gods and their cults, but even today, such a twisted view leads minds which have become estranged from the Jewish true conception of God, leads them into the arms of heathen illusions and practices. Rabbi Hirsch says this verse warns us not to allow such ideas to confuse our thoughts of God. But then the verse continues, okay, do not turn to idols, and then it says, and do not make yourselves gods, molten gods for yourselves. What are these molten gods? The Hebrew word masecha is here translated as molten, meaning poured out, cast images. The word's root, the two letters samach chet, is related to the word nasoch, pouring. So the verse conveys the idea, do not form gods for yourself, poured out in some form, like the golden calf called in Exodus 32, a molten calf, and like the verse in Isaiah 42:17, those who say to molten idols, you are our gods. These are imaginary gods, poured out, meaning, open up your heart, why does Torah call them poured out? They are manufactured to suit the needs and comfort zone of man. So the Elilim, the idols first mentioned in the verse, are the gods as they are imagined to be, and Elohei Masecha, the molten gods, are their molded representation. And as Rabbi Hirsch teaches, this is the sin of subjectivity. Cast idols are figures which at any desired moment can be remolded to any shape or form to suit the needs and expectations of one's imagination. But it's man who's created in the image of God, not the other way around. The deepest truth is that Torah's use of this word masecha here in this verse is even more amazing, because in addition to the idea it conveys of molten, of a pouring out, the word masecha also means a mask. It's also related to the word masach, meaning a cover or a covering or a divider. A mask covers over and also separates the wearer from everyone else. This is how the word is used in Exodus 36:37. For the entrance of the tent, he made a screen. And Isaiah 22:8 states, he uncovered the screen of Judah. And in Isaiah 25, we find the word masecha used as the masks that cover all the nations. So perhaps we can understand, do not make gods of masecha, to also convey the idea, do not make a masked God in the sense of a covering. Don't attempt through your subjective representation to cover over the true nature of God, who is existence itself, life itself. Do not allow your actions to make a divider between you and God. Do not separate yourself from who he really is by bringing him down to a material level that is no longer godly, by covering this true God with a stylized God made to order on your terms that you make to fit within your expectation, within your comfort zone, which is nothing but a reflection of yourself. These thoughts are all so apropos during these days of Sefirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, as we focus on our midot, our character traits, addressing the needs of fixing our true spiritual essence by addressing those areas of our lives in which our behavior is lacking, and by striving to emulate the divine attributes and truly realign our relationship with God according to his terms, not ours. The true holiness sought by our portion, characterized by concern for others and proper conduct, is so missing from the world today. We live in a time when the divine image in which man was created is trampled upon daily. Parashat Kedoshim reminds us that the meaning of what it is to be holy is to be part of this world by living as a caring, just, compassionate, responsible society, to be a part of this world by amplifying its beauty through acts of kindness and righteousness, heeding Hashem's call to be holy as He is holy. Thank you for watching this week's Jerusalem Lights Torah portion. May we all grow stronger in the calling and commitment to live lives of holiness. And may Hashem's light grow even stronger in this world through our obedience to that divine call. Shabbat Shalom.